On May 8, 2026, the United States government did something it has never done before. It opened the files. Not some of the files, not selected documents carefully curated to say as little as possible. The Pentagon launched a system called Pursue, the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP encounters, and began releasing decades of classified UFO records to the public. No clearance required, available to anyone, right now, today. What those files contain has been reshaping the conversation about UFOs faster than anything since the Nimitz footage. Military encounters with orbs that split into multiple objects. Infrared footage the Pentagon calls among the most compelling in its holdings. An account from Buzz Aldrin, the Apollo 11 astronaut, describing something he saw in space that he called a possible laser. Records of objects over nuclear sites, over military bases, over restricted airspace in Iraq, Syria, and Africa. Cases from the 1950s and 1960s, cases from 2024 and 2025. Decades of encounters, now public. And this happened because Congress has been pushing hard for years. Because military whistleblowers have been testifying under oath. Because the pressure became too great to contain. Whatever you believe about UFOs, the U.S. government just admitted it has been holding unexplained encounters for decades. And now you can see them. This is Vantage Elite. And tonight, we go through the most important things in those files. Section 2. What is Pursue? What just happened? Let's be precise about what the Pursue release actually is, because precision matters here. Pursue is the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP encounters. Launched May 8, 2026 under the direction of President Donald Trump. It is a multi-agency effort coordinated by the Department of Defense, now called the Department of War, to find, review, declassify, and publicly release UAP-related records from across the entire U.S. government. That includes records from the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, NASA, and multiple intelligence agencies, all in one place, all publicly accessible. The Pentagon's own statement about these files says something significant. It calls them unresolved cases. The materials archived here are unresolved cases, meaning the government is unable to make a definitive determination on the nature of the observed phenomena. The United States government is telling you, directly, that it has cases it cannot explain. Not cases that were investigated and found to be weather balloons. Not cases that were reviewed and found to be conventional aircraft. Unresolved. Cannot be explained. That is the government's own characterization. Why now? The timing of this release is not accidental. It comes after years of sustained congressional pressure. It comes after the 2023 House Oversight hearing where Commander David Fravor, Ryan Graves, and David Grush testified about UAP encounters and alleged retrieval programs. It comes after a September 2025 hearing before the House Oversight Committee's task force on the declassification of federal secrets, where current and former military personnel described encounters that, in one witness's words, changed their lives and the way they think about everything. It comes after the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, reached full operational capacity in 2024 and began accumulating cases it openly describes as having no known explanation. The pressure built. The files are open. Whether this release represents genuine transparency or carefully managed disclosure, we will discuss. But the files are real, and what they contain is remarkable. Section 3. The Orbs. Orbs. Launching Orbs, 2023, Western United States. The file that AARO itself describes as among the most compelling in its current holdings involves 7 federal officers, 7 separate witnesses, across several western U.S. states, over 2 days in 2023, reporting the same thing independently. Orange orbs, releasing smaller red orbs. The witnesses described watching orbs launch other orbs, parent objects releasing child objects that then behaved independently. They also reported a large, hovering, glowing sphere, and an object described as a translucent kite. 7 credentialed federal officers, independent reports, across multiple states, over 48 hours. AARO's own assessment. The reporter's credibility and the potentially anomalous nature of the events combine to make this report among the most compelling within AARO's current holdings. That is the U.S. government's UAP office calling this their most compelling case. The Superhot Orb, 2025. A second case, location redacted, involves jet and helicopter crews simultaneously. They encounter what their thermal imaging describes as a superhot orb, an object generating enough heat to register dramatically on infrared systems. Then the object accelerates to a high rate of speed, and it breaks into 2 objects, and then those 2 become 4 or 5. An orb that splits, multiplies, and accelerates, seen simultaneously by jet crews and helicopter crews, captured on U.S. military thermal imaging. Included in the Pursue files because the Pentagon cannot explain it. The Hellfire missile encounter, September 2025. This is perhaps the single most striking account in the entire initial Pursue release. A U.S. military Hellfire missile, one of the most precisely engineered weapons in the American arsenal, strikes a spherical UAP. The missile makes contact. The orb absorbs the impact and continues flying, undamaged. Investigative journalist George Knapp described this account, which involved military radar data, as having no prosaic explanation from the Pentagon. A U.S. military weapon struck a UAP. The UAP continued on its way. That is in the U.S. government's own released files. Section 4. Buzz Aldrin and the Apollo files. Among the Pursue release materials are NASA transcripts from the Apollo era, including an account from Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11, the second man to walk on the moon. In transcripts included in the Pursue files, Aldrin describes observing what he called a fairly bright light source during the mission. I observed what appeared to be a fairly bright light source, which we tentatively ascribed to a possible laser, he said. A light source in space that Aldrin and his crew could not immediately explain. This account has been in government files for decades. It is now public. There are also Apollo 17 photographs included in the release, showing what was described as 3 dots in a triangular formation in the lower right quadrant of the lunar sky. Photographs taken during a crewed moon mission, showing a triangular formation of objects that no one has ever fully explained. These accounts matter not because they prove anything definitively. They matter because they show how long this has been happening. The Apollo program ran from 1961 to 1972. The accounts from those missions, now in the Pursue files, suggest that whatever is being observed in modern UAP encounters has been present in our airspace and our near-space environment for at least 6 decades. 6 decades of unexplained encounters, and the government has been keeping those files. Section 5. The Whistleblowers and Congress. September 2025. House Oversight Committee. The Pursue release did not come from nowhere. It came after one of the most significant congressional hearings in modern UAP history. September 9, 2025. The House Oversight Committee's task force on the declassification of federal secrets. Current and former military personnel testifying about their encounters. Air Force veteran Jeffrey Nuccitelli said on the record, "What we saw changed our lives, the way we think about everything. It was incredibly profound." Not a fringe figure, not someone with a book to sell. A military veteran testifying before Congress about what he witnessed in active duty. Other witnesses at that hearing described objects that appeared to eclipse existing weapons and technology, objects moving in ways that no known aircraft can move.
Encounters that left trained military personnel fundamentally changed. David Grush and the retrieval programs. In the 2023 hearing, David Grush, a former intelligence officer with direct access to classified UAP programs, testified under oath that the U.S. government has been operating non-human craft retrieval programs that have been running for decades, programs that existed before AARO, before AATIP, before any of the public-facing UAP investigation structures. Grush has faced significant pushback. His claims are extraordinary. They require extraordinary evidence, but he made them under oath, before Congress, with the knowledge that lying to Congress is a federal crime. He has not retracted them. The Pursue release does not confirm Grush's claims, but the pattern of what is in those files, unresolved encounters, weapon-absorbing orbs, objects that split and multiply, decades of Apollo-era sightings, creates a context in which his claims become harder to simply dismiss. The government has acknowledged it has unexplained encounters. The question now is what explains them. Section 6. Honest Assessment. Because this is Vantage Elite, we go through this honestly. What the skeptics say, and they have points. Astrophysicist David Whitehouse reviewed the initial Pursue materials and concluded that some are optical artifacts, others fuzzy blobs and light smears, and some obviously balloons. He said there is no hint of anything artificial and alien.
Astronomer Michael Narlock said the documents largely contain transcripts of eyewitness accounts, which are notoriously unreliable, while the videos lacked sufficient context to assess. Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute affirmed there is no compelling evidence for extraterrestrial life in the release. These are credentialed scientists making legitimate observations. Many of the files are blurry. Many of the accounts are eyewitness testimony without corroboration. The release is imperfect. What requires honest caution? Not all 2,000-plus U.S. reports from 2025 are equally compelling. Volume does not equal significance. The Hellfire missile account, while dramatic, comes filtered through a journalist's description rather than direct government documentation in the initial release. The Apollo transcripts show pilots describing what they saw in real time, but attributing something to a possible laser is precisely the kind of careful uncertainty that good pilots maintain. It is not a confirmation. Managed disclosure is a real possibility. If a government wanted to normalize UAP discussion gradually, releasing carefully selected materials over time is exactly how you would do it. What cannot be explained away? 7 federal officers independently reporting orbs launching orbs across multiple states. AARO calls this its most compelling case. Skeptics have not explained this. Military thermal imaging of an orb that splits into multiple objects and accelerates. This is government-captured infrared footage from trained military personnel. AARO itself, the government's own UAP investigation office, categorizing cases as unresolved. Not mistakes, not conventional aircraft, unresolved. The weight of testimony from people who have nothing obvious to gain and everything to lose by speaking. Whatever is in these files, the government cannot explain them. That is not a UFO researcher's claim. That is the government's own classification of its own files. Section 7. Ending. Something shifted on May 8, 2026. It is too early to say exactly what shifted. Whether this is genuine transparency or managed disclosure, whether it represents the beginning of something or just a controlled release of old material, will only become clear over time. But here is what we know. The United States government, through its own official website, is now saying that it has cases it cannot explain. Cases involving military personnel. Cases with radar confirmation. Cases with infrared footage. Cases spanning from the 1950s to last year. Unresolved. Air Force veteran Jeffrey Nuccitelli stood before Congress and said his encounter changed the way he thinks about everything. He is in his 50s. He served his country. He has no obvious motive to fabricate a story that would invite ridicule. Commander David Fravor flew the F-18 over the Pacific in 2004. He is in his early 60s now. He has told the same story for 2 decades. The government released his encounters footage. Congress heard his testimony. Captain Kenju Terauchi flew the 747 over Alaska in 1986. The CIA suppressed his data. He was grounded. He never retracted his report. These are not fringe figures. These are credentialed professionals who encountered something they could not explain, and whose accounts have survived decades of scrutiny without falling apart. The files are open now. You can go to war.gov and read them yourself. You can look at the infrared footage, read the military memos, study the accounts. The government is telling you these are unresolved. That is where we are in 2026. Whatever is in those skies, over nuclear sites, over military bases, over Alaska, over the Pacific, over the western states, over Iraq and Syria and Africa, has been there for a long time. And the government that has been watching it for decades has finally opened the door a crack. The question now is what comes through it. Subscribe to Vantage Elite for cases like this. Documented, verified, done properly. Drop a comment. What in the Pursue files surprised you most? And I will see you in the next one.